So the General Medical Council, the body responsible for upholding medical standards in the UK, has removed all references to mothers from its policies on maternity, and has removed all references to women in its guidance on the menopause. Joe, what do you think it tells us that an important medical organisation like this has, gone to gender neutralise all of their language, essentially?
It's totally embarrassing. I mean, you can't imagine for 1 second that these doctors, presumably after 6-7 years of training and many years in practice, don't actually know the difference between male and female anatomy and don't really know that it's women that give birth and go through the menopause. So it suggests this is just an entirely political move on their behalf, and they basically acquiesced to the transgender activists. They've complied with what Stonewall wants to see implemented in their policy. I think the frustrating thing is, with the trans debate more broadly, it's kind of feels like you're playing a constant game of whack-a-mole. As soon as you kind of stop some mad guidance taking into effect in schools or in one sphere of life, up it pops somewhere else. Yeah. And, you can never seemingly reach a point where you just relax and say, rationality has won out. There's always these different areas. These are internal policies for the GMC, but I think it does need to worry all of us because, as you said, this is the governing body, sets the standards, but also has influence over medical training. Yeah. So this is the language that medical students, junior doctors are becoming accustomed to, and I'm becoming increasingly concerned at how it actually ends up impacting upon how we even think, how we begin to conceive of the world. The more you get used to hearing these terms like pregnant people, menopausal colleagues, you end up finding yourself even thinking in those terms yourself. And I think this is a huge problem. We really need to kind of reclaim this language, and doctors need to be able to assert the right to say that women are female. Yeah.
Tom, could you even trust a doctor who thinks that men can get pregnant?
Ask me if I had a bonus hole or something. Yeah, no, it is. The medical profession is a fascinating one when these things come up because, this is an example of a maternity policy that cannot admit to the existence of mothers. Yeah. This is a very strange state of affairs when you get into that sort of situation. And when the kind of language and the kind of new words and pronouns and all sorts of things which are being introduced, people often say, this would be really confusing if you weren't a native English speaker, if you're an immigrant background. It's confusing to most people, I think. Yeah. If you go up and you just start naming body parts rather than talking about anything else, or if you start naming orifices with slightly strange names, this is something which is going to become a barrier between clinicians and their patients. The only thing that you can hold on to is that obviously this is a sort of lip service that goes on. It's a sort of genuflection. But it won't be forever, because if they're getting taught this stuff, if there's a younger generation who are going through medical school very much kind of surrounded by all this kind of ideology, it won't necessarily be like that. It won't just be a virtue signal at a certain point. This will just become part of the practice.
Already has consequences. The General Medical Council advises that you should change your patient's sex if they self-identify as another sex. And the result of that is that, biological women miss out on smear tests because they find themselves in the wrong category, and prostate checkups for biological men who claim to be women. So it's dangerous for transgender people in particular. It seems to just appease a set of activists.
No, absolutely. It's also dangerous and troubling has consequences for which ward somebody would get placed on should they go in hospital. And we've had various rulings and messages coming from government about the importance of single-sex wards. But again, it just shows how the NHS as an institution is unable to bypass essentially government policy by introducing their own restrictions or their own kind of regulations. What concerns me in all of this is what it says about the purpose of the NHS as well. We've also seen this week the amount of, again, another announcement about the NHS setting up kind of centres to promote diversity, equity and inclusion, and people and community, people and culture. And it just seems like so much money, so much staff time is being diverted into these essentially woke projects that are far more concerned with politics and far more concerned with what people think about than the physical state. And it almost suggests that there's a desire to, I'm perhaps going a bit far here, but almost to change the purpose of the NHS. They're far more concerned with our thinking than they are with our bodies. You know, they're less concerned about wanting to treat the physically sick as they are about re-educating people who think the wrong thoughts. You know, and particularly when this lands in a week when you've got both doctors and consultants on strike, you know, they're not queuing up to get into work to actually perform operations, but they are able to come up with all these bonkers policies about gender identity. It's embarrassing and awful.